My name is Ramon. I work for Zeppelin, from Zeppelin Solutions and Open Zeppelin, and today we're going to talk about developer infrastructure. So to get started, I think the best way is you can talk a little bit about yourself and then say what you're working on and why it's important.
Hi, I'm George Ormbo, the CTO at Climatics. I'm working on a project called the Utility Settlement Coin, which is a project to tokenize cash assets held at a central bank.
Neil Bly, VP of Product of Mainframe. We just launched our first public release of Mainframe OS. Like many at this conference, we're part of the extended family who want to change how people build dApps and how users think about dApps and discover dApps.
I'm Yaniv, project lead at The Graph. We're a query protocol for getting data off blockchains and storage networks. So we index data from Ethereum and IPFS right now and make it available over GraphQL.
Hello, my name is Igor. I am from POA. POA is a company which is focused on building scalability and interoperability solutions. We are known for POA network, XDAI, which is powered ecosystem today for payments on this event. And we making tools for developers. We have open source blockchain explorer, Block Scout, and interoperability solution Token Bridge, which is used to create XDAI chain and other bridges.
Awesome. Let's get right to it. Everyone here is building tools for developers, but as you know, right now there are really few users. So the question is, why? Why are we missing users? Because the usual answer is like that infrastructure is missing, but what parts of the infrastructure are missing?
I guess I'd start with the onboarding. So like if you want to use a dApp, you have to get some ETH, you have to install MetaMask, you have to go to find an exchange, maybe buy a hardware wallet. So like initially that experience just probably turns people off.
Yeah, one of what he said, as well as discoverability. We want to create a home for the users to come to be able to discover all these amazing dApps that everyone wants to build. So we want to provide a one-click installation that sets up a wallet, sets up an identity, sets up contacts, and kind of sets that stage to be able to find a place to consume these dApps.
Yeah, I agree that UX is probably like the first big thing, obviously scalability. But users don't come for infrastructure, right? They're going to come for the applications, and it's just too difficult to build good user experiences, good, fully decentralized apps today. So, there's a lot of kind of missing protocols, I think, where right now people are building these hybrids, and you kind of have to build a hybrid. Basically, what we should assume is that nobody's going to use an app that's worse than the centralized equivalent, and so that's the bar's already been set. Unfortunately, the previous stack had at least 20 years to mature, and so it's just a lot easier to build apps that are really easy to use for Web 2, and so we kind of have some catch up. So when we get to the point where it takes a similar amount of time to build an app for Web 3, and that app is just as easy to use as a Web 2 app, then it's up to the entrepreneurs to just build good applications that use all of these new capabilities that we have to just build compelling experiences.
I'd like to quote Microsoft co-founder. He said, "Developers, developers, developers." Right. So in our space, it's the most expensive and most important asset for any blockchain projects is community, and community of developers is very important, right? So also I'd like to quote that you can make anything, but you cannot make everything, right? Like when we think about tools for developers, like each project is focusing on something. For example, for me, it makes no sense to make a library for smart contracts like Open Zeppelin, right? Because why should I compete? I'll better contribute to it, right? But when we built our tools, we figure out that there is a missing piece of open source blockchain explorer, and we started to build it, right? And now we see that community is coming to this project and contribute to it, and it makes no sense to start the same thing, and other projects can focus on on different part of tools for developers. And that's a great thing about Ethereum ecosystem, that we have so many different companies which are building tools for different parts. And if you look at the ecosystem as a whole, you can see that you can build a lot of stuff, right? But you cannot build everything alone. So that's a good thing about collaboration between all of us.
Yeah, I really like what you said, that in the end it's all about providing a greater product for the users. It doesn't matter that it's decentralized. Most users are not going to use something just because it is decentralized. We need to provide something that is 10 times faster, better, or let them do something that they couldn't do before. So regarding our users, I'm curious, how do you inform your product decisions in the midst of this uncertainty and immaturity of the whole ecosystem?
I guess maybe I can give a bit of perspective from an enterprise perspective. So I think for our use case, the technology's been proved. It can handle the use case that we need. And we're now moving out to integrations. And there, I think the tooling is still pretty bad. So like libraries for integrating traditional systems, maybe libraries for some of the more, the older languages that are used in financial institutions. So whilst I think the tooling for building smart contracts is pretty good, it's not far away from like the Rails experience. It's quite easy to deploy. I still think there needs to be more tooling and infrastructure for business use and business context.
So our users are basically developers. I think there's probably at least 50 like well-funded teams building like dApps with smart contracts, and that's already like a pretty good set to start working with for user research and making sure that we're like solving real problems for them. And then I think there's this like much larger segment of just like individual developers, and I don't know what the exact stats are. I think the numbers kind of float widely, but I would feel comfortable assuming that it's at least in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of like active Ethereum developers. And so, maybe they're not doing it for their full-time job yet, but they're hacking on weekends or coming to hackathons like this. And so I think just getting in front of as many of them as we can, coming to hackathons, working actually with the developers. When they get stuck, they can like come to us and we're like right there kind of coding together. I think those type feedback loops make a really big difference. And so already I think there's enough usage to be able to like build infrastructure that solves real problems.
In our scenario, because we're building sidechains, and sidechains usually need all parts of Ethereum ecosystem to operate. When we decided what to build, it was like, do we have like some missing pieces which are not available? For example, Etherscan, right? It's closed source, not available for developers to hack on it. Sometimes it censors some data, not friendly to suggestions and so forth, right? So it was a missing piece and we decided to take this part. And the same problems there are with Infura, MetaMask, and then some other parts of Ethereum ecosystem, unfortunately. Now it's getting better. And also interesting, last year I was on the same panel, the same room, but it was more about interoperability. And we just discovered that like it's possible to transfer assets between networks, right? Like 1 year after this, at this panel we have at least 2 projects with production-ready interoperability solutions, which are not compete with each other, but can be used with different security models for different users, and they have different developers who can contribute to these projects, right? And it's great to see that our ecosystem is growing and we filling these missing pieces. And I think now we should look outside of the ecosystem. Like, what's interesting in Tron, which we can adapt in the Ethereum ecosystem, right? And sometimes we think, yeah, like, not Tron is, how Vitalik said, whatever. But they have very engaged users who are very interested in playing apps, right? So they have less developers, but they have very engaged user base. And that's why their developers are more focused on B2C, and Ethereum, we're more focused on B2B, right? At the end of the day, we're all sellers here. And well, we all sell to developers and to each other, but you know, not many applications B2C, unfortunately, right? And in other ecosystem, we can see that they innovate different way, and we can get this into Ethereum ecosystem, let's say.
Yeah, I do agree. So, you know, something I've been kind of thinking about, possibly the difference between a pioneer and an explorer. I think this conference is full of pioneers, and I also think it's full of explorers. And one of the ways I think I would articulate the difference is explorers don't have maps. Explorers go out there, they figure out a map, and then they let the pioneers continue to follow. And one of the things that doesn't have a map yet is the user experience and how to get the customers, how to find this audience. So in some ways, we at Mainframe, we're painting this picture of the future. We want decentralization, pure decentralization, and we know we're not ready, and I think there are many people here who share that same story. But there are plenty of spaces that we do this part correctly, and this 20%, this 40%, and we see amazing other 20% and 30%. We were talking earlier about that concept that together, as we, what would we like out of Tron? What do we like out of Zeppelin? And as we look at these spaces, we can combine it. We can create this map, and then we go back and say, hey, we're going to tackle this area, we're going to tackle that area, and you know, all tides rise. Rising tide raises all ships.
I was just going to say, in response to Igor, you know, I think we've been going through a lot of designing and creating protocols, and you know, interoperability protocols, Ethereum protocol, but it's real-world use cases that people are interested in. So, like, you know, the Buffy DAI is proof that you can use the protocol and it does work, and people can understand it because it's in their hand and they can buy a pizza. And like, I think until we have more things like that, you know, we're still going to be on panels talking about this.
So I'm actually happy that we're not spending too much time trying to get new users yet, because I feel like if we, you know, expanded a huge marketing budget and reputation budget trying to get new users, I think, you know, they could get burned for a long time. And so it's kind of this exercise in patience and maybe even vision that we have that we're like, you know what, I'm okay investing years of my life on something where I won't know the results potentially for a few years. And the truth is there's just so much infrastructure to build that there's going to be certain applications, and certainly there are already some today, that you could already build a really compelling experience for users, but it's like it's much smaller segment of apps. And so, you know, maybe right now it's like 1% of applications you could build compellingly on Web3. And so I'm personally okay with that.
Okay, so we touched briefly on the problems that are preventing us to reach mass adoptions, like usability and scalability. So let's say I'm a dApp developer, like many people here in the room. What would be your recommendation for them at the time of choosing tools and how they can position their dApps to reach mass adoption? What is your advice?
Well, I guess for me, the tooling is pretty much in place. I think, you know, Truffle, MetaMask, Infura, you can get started really quickly. You can deploy an app, do an ICO if you want. But now it's sort of thinking more traditionally. You know, what do people actually want? Understanding the use case, doing some marketing. So I think you mentioned you have a marketing team, and I think we really need to be more mindful. We're selling things to human beings who don't care about protocols or things like this. So yeah, I'd say thinking beyond the technology and the tooling to more a business mindset.
Yeah, I'd also like to challenge everyone here and myself that maybe we don't borrow every metaphor from Web 2. And so part of being able to just say, what do we want the future to look like? So before we just go down this path where we're just building component after component on top of Web 2, maybe we're all actually frustrated with the things of Web 2. Do we really want 5 years to be plugins on top of browsers on top of other plugins? And so this idea that we have a chance to kind of reset what we want this to be, and we have a chance to have privacy first. We have a chance to have the user to have a reasonable expectation from a non-technical user of what security means to them. And it probably doesn't mean much. And so being able to go that far in the future and then kind of work backwards. So I think a lot of us in this space are working backwards because there's so many people working forward, and then we meet in a magical middle.
I think the most important thing is just to make sure people are solving real problems. And so, just like with traditional startups, if you're building something that people don't want, they're not going to use it. And so there's kind of this, formula where you look at what's the motivation to perform this action, and then what's the friction towards actually accomplishing that task. And if my motivation is larger than the friction, then maybe I'll perform the task. And I think people just need to really balance that and think about how much additional friction am I forcing on them, and how much do they want this thing, how much value are they getting out of it, and if you can make that equation work, then go after it.
I remember one more good quote. Simple things should be simple, and complex things should be possible, right? That's very important. And speaking of Buffy-Dye, and I think most people who got food here had this experience of seamless payment, electronic peer-to-peer cash system, working fast, and the important thing about Buffy-Dye is that it's that we have synergy, right? And if you think about underlying parts, for example, XDAI chain, which is like the first ever stable USD chain, and which is powered by DAI, which is I think the most important stable currency nowadays, and other parts like interoperability, which enable this type of sidechain, and Genius Burner wallet, right? And this experience, and thinking out of the box that users should not, immediately after launching the app, back up their keys, remember seed phrase, and make all these checks. All these parts all together create synergy, right? Like 1 + 1 + 1, it equals great experience for everyone. And that's what we should think about when we think about user adoption. Because I remember when we started POA, the question was about scalability. Can we help existing dApps run on minimal viable decentralized network, as I call it, with some security assumptions which are, well, decentralized and secure until someone can prove otherwise, and they're like audited and launched in secure way. When we launched POA network, we figure out that many dApps, they don't want to migrate. They just want to wait when foundation will make scalability solution for them. This scalability problem, I think, will hit many projects which launched to solve this problem, right? They have perfect, fast transactions per second. They have fast block time and enormous block size. For example, one chain which I very like because they made something very important. It's called GoChain. They launched public EVM chain with 136 million gas per block. So it's huge blocks. And you can put 600, 700 transactions per second into their chain. And well, the question is like, who needs that, right? Like if you solve scalability problem, it will not bring developers, users, only if you have this thing. But we can see that collaboration of multiple projects within ecosystem can bring solutions like Buffy-Dye, which is fast, scalable, and super exciting from UX perspective.
So you're bringing up an interesting point, which is to build some of this infrastructure, you could say, right, it might take a long time. It could take a few years. And so you kind of have this tension between, do we wait for it to be done right, or do we do a kind of stopgap or try to launch something out that we can get out today? And one way that I think would be helpful to kind of think about it is for sure having like a preference for shipping, as soon as possible, and validating things and building today is really important, so we should do that. But then you have this kind of churn that you're potentially putting on the developers, right? If every year we have to rebuild everything, you're going to burn developers out. And so I think as much as possible, if we can figure out what are the right APIs for these different kind of like protocols, and then maybe you start with something where it's running on like a side chain today, but then you don't have to completely like rewrite your application on top once it kind of migrates over. That would be a really good way to solve that.
Awesome. we all have here a privileged point of view because we all build for developers, so we can all see what's coming. So I would like you to comment a bit of the nuances of the different verticals that you see are gaining traction, both in the enterprise and consumer side.
Yeah, I guess what we see in enterprise is probably similar to the public space. People just want it to work. They don't want to have to spend a day installing stuff. And they come from a different mindset. They've got stuff to do, they're busy, they don't have time to do massive research projects. So they want the tools to be provided for them, and it actually hinders adoption when they're not there. So, we're making some good strides with some libraries, but their motivation is getting stuff done.
Yeah, I also think a motivation of enterprise is revenue. And so a lot of the conversations we have here is, oh, did you do an ICO? Are you going up for another round of investment? Or do you have a revenue model? If you have a revenue model in this current ecosystem, I'm very interested in hearing about it, because that gets at the heart of discoverability. That gets become something attractive to the enterprise if they say, we have an audience prepared. So it's really hard to tackle in that enterprise. And I think a lot of the enterprise space right now is consulting advice and consulting solutions. And it is not necessarily that these enterprises are actually making that much traction into this space for usability and adoption.
I think open finance is kind of like the obvious answer to that question for right now, just because there's so much value to kind of be had if you can make money, et cetera. And also, you're kind of willing to put up with a little bit more friction if there's a high value kind of transaction at play, and banks suck. So, compared to the alternative, I think we could build some pretty compelling experiences already, and we're seeing that. I think the other, one other interesting kind of vertical is governance. And I think, you could definitely say that, compared to the alternative, we can also build some really interesting things. And I think, we're still in this kind of phase where it's still kind of a toy. And so you're going to get a lot of the missionaries and the believers that are here out of passion. And so if you're thinking about how can I really make the world a better place, and let's start experimenting with different kind of governance systems, I think there's already a pretty good market for that, right? I don't know how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Ethereum developers or related people would participate in those types of experiments. But between protocols like Aragon and DAO Stack and et cetera, I think you're already starting to see DAOs getting built. Moloch, is in the process of launching. So really cool experimentation where it's still kind of early adopters, but I think there's cool things being done there already.
I agree with ideas around DAO. And when we think about, let's say, BuffDAI and the underlying technology, XDAI chain is controlled by DAO, like 4 companies validate state, but none of them can add or remove validators without other companies. They have on-chain governance enforceable by the protocol. Bridge, which transferred DAI to XDAI, XDAI to DAI, is also controlled by DAO. And DAO are everywhere. Sometimes we don't call them DAO, but like multisig, which can control some parameters, and there are some known parties who can modify these parameters, is DAO. So DAO are everywhere, and it's very important to build dApps. And many decentralized finance apps, they just not possible without DAO. Right? Like you cannot build Bridge without DAO. You cannot build many consensus models without DAO. Right? Also, what we figure out with XDAI, that new vertical called dApps chain emerging. It's a specific sidechain, well, shard, parachain, whatever, for a specific task. And when we think about the specifics, we understand that shards will be different, right? So they will have different parameters, they will have different, native tokens, different everything. And it's important to think about these dApp chains as diverse platforms, right? But we need some common security models. I don't think it will be relay chains because relay chains bring too many centralization. But that's an emerging thing. XDAI is a very small sidechain, $9,000 market cap, one of the smallest public cryptocurrency ever, right? but it's used for transactions, and it's specific for programmable money, right? If you build something like privacy-preserving sidechain, you might modify opcodes to make less expensive some, I don't know, cryptographic primitives running on this chain, right? And it will be a different setting, and it can be different specific sidechain. So that's an emerging thing. And some people were excited about XDAI and launched their sidechain based on the same idea, where ERC20 token can be bridged into a native token of a sidechain. And let's say Israeli project Kolu launched their own sidechain based on the same idea, and they bridged their token. And what I can see here that like most of these projects, they're very interested in autonomy. They want to be autonomous from pooled security of other chain, but they're very interested in being in ecosystem, right? When they can move tokens back and forth, get advantages of interconnected chains, but they still want to have autonomy within their own sidechain, right? That's a big vertical of dApps-specific sidechains based at shard parachains, sidechains, but specific to use cases. Right.
Given that we are talking already about sidechains, I would like to get the opinion of everyone about interoperability. What's the demand that you are sensing from developers, and why should they care about it?
Yes, I think we see huge demand, and so we have Ion, an open source interoperability framework. We've got Ethereum to Ethereum, also Hyperledger Fabric to Ethereum. But in the enterprise space, what's happening is people are experimenting with lots of different systems and coins. Even JP Morgan issued a coin the other day. But it's the same problem as the public space, like moving value around this ecosystem is hard. So I think we're seeing huge demand from our sector, and we're seeing the enterprise actually taking this quite seriously now.
Yeah, I think interoperability is a survival mechanism, even more than just a good idea. I think if we have a long road ahead of us to achieve this future of decentralization or the hybrid and whatever we decide as a society works best, wherever blockchain ends up fitting, interoperability is going to be the way it gets there, because tomorrow someone's going to come out with a new sidechain, tomorrow someone's going to come out with a new framework, and it's going to be better and it's going to be exciting. And the more we're just used to swapping out and upgrading pieces of the system, then again, we just keep improving the system piece by piece. So interoperability, frenemies, working with each other is actually, I think, the way to survive in this space and to push it forward.
Yeah, I think it's really likely that it's going to be a multi-blockchain future. I think we're already seeing that. I think, whether it's shards on Ethereum or, more of a heterogeneous mix of different types of blockchains, I think it's going to be all of the above. I think there's a lot of value that Ethereum can provide as kind of the first kind of main chain, if you will. And whether that's as like a settlement layer, and whether it's that it's going to have like the highest security, or whether it's just like this like master clock that everybody else is just a slave to. It's more of a clock than anything else. There's a lot of interesting architectures that you could build, but I think definitely there are going to be a lot of different blockchains connecting together, and we're just going to have to see what the right kind of architecture for that is.
I'd like to say interoperability is hard. So it's very hard to build solutions, and we operate two protocols in production. One on POA network, where native token can be wrapped on Ethereum. And we built this because we thought that on sidechains it's quite hard to get access to liquidity of centralized exchanges. Well, actually, when centralized exchange connects sidechains, it's a form of interoperability protocol, right, between one network and another network. And we wrapped our native token and moved it to mainnet. After almost a year of working of this bridge in production, we see that it's usable, it solves some problems, and of getting listed on more exchanges, but it's hard, right? And also it's a new attack surface, and networks are different, and some theoretical problems of interop are not solved yet, right? For example, Oracle problem is not solved, right? Finality of chains, all chains, most chains they have a probabilistic finality. Only private and enterprise chains have instant finality, and we will see some, some chains with instant finality based on proof of stake, but we never seen interop protocols between these chains. And also, one topic that many people don't think about in this space is legal part of the interop, because when you think about interop between two chains, basically it's an exchange for, let's say, one token pair, right? And it's quite easy to not comply with regulation, especially with the US regulation, and that's also stopping from many types of protocol. For example, if Alice can send funds to Bob cross-chain, most likely it will require KYC on both sides. Otherwise, how the protocol will differentiate US taxpayers and non-US taxpayers, which is very important, right? So that's why we designed our protocols to make to be self-transfers, right? So Alice can send funds only to Alice. And the last thing I want to add, when you think about interop, developers and users may think about something else. One example, one game called Everdragons migrated from Ethereum to POA because on POA they have faster transactions and cheaper execution. And after they understood that there are not many users on this network, right? And they thought, yeah, let's make one more bridge to Tron, right? Because on Tron you have many users. And they built one more bridge, and this game has two bridges, one Ethereum to POA and one POA to Tron, and you can move your Dragon from any of this network and you can trade them, you can play on different networks, and that's what built by developers because they had demand for it, right? We think about, yeah, we need to add more liquidity, we need to make tokens transferable, but game developers, they need, we just need players, right? And players exist on other chains. Let's just bring this bridge to another chain and let allow people to play on other games. So that's, I think games are the future of interop. Sorry for the long.
If I may, I just would agree that interop is really hard. So we've done Hyperledger Fabric, but to do that interoperability leg, you really have to understand the security properties, the validation mechanism, a range of other stuff. But I guess one thing I'm worried about in interoperability is we're sort of building these layers at layer 2. So we're building quite kludgy interoperability mechanisms. And I just wonder whether we need to go down a level to a lower level protocol. So I know there's like the Interledger protocol, there's a number of, our protocol, your protocol, but actually standardizing this and having a seamless way to transact is very, very hard because consensus is different, security properties are different, and I just wonder whether we can ever achieve that.
I think one of the biggest architectural decisions that you have to make is like what dependencies, right, you're going to take on. And I think you're exactly right that like right now, each kind of layer 1 protocol lives as an island, to itself. And I think it's just because we're so early in building this infrastructure that it's a huge risk to take on a dependency on anybody else. But you could imagine that in some number of years, when protocols really kind of prove themselves, then maybe taking a dependency is a reasonable choice.
I think we have to be willing to take that risk, right? I think going in, the best way to take risk is to allow ourselves to be open to the criticism, to be able to understandably mainframe. We're open source. We have it out there. Everybody can sit there and analyze which part of our system is the best part and not the best part, and help us kind of crowdsource the risk as well. I don't pretend that I'm going to be able to come up with all the best ideas for the best protocol. Every day I learn some kind of new thing that I could integrate the system, and I've learned 1 million of them in the last 48 hours of being here. So I think it is risky, and to take that risk is open yourself up to criticism and be able to understand how to make the most of it.
Awesome. We are right on time, so thanks everyone for listening and thanks for being here.